From having your leg literally snapped at 90 degrees to becoming a legitimate MVP candidate, this is the story of NBA superstar Paul George. Paul Clifton Anthony George was born on May 2nd, 1990, to Paul George Sr., his father, and Paulette Ann George, his mother, in Palmdale, California. George began playing organized basketball in his freshman year at Knight High School and played for Pump and Run of the AAU. George played basketball at the beginning of the season for the JV team in his sophomore year, but was promoted to the varsity team after the season began. And this is when he started to realize he was special. He was the only non-senior on the varsity team's starting lineup in his junior year. And if you played basketball, then you know you ain't getting no PT if you aren't a senior, let alone start. So, George began to garner attention in 2007, and after putting up incredible performances, his coach handed him the leading role in his senior season, leading his high school team to the Golden League Championship. Despite this success, however, George was not considered a major prospect by colleges. He was ranked the 47th best small forward prospect in 2008, a list that had players ahead of him like Al-Farouq Aminu, that was ranked 3rd at the time. Yeah, okay. George committed verbally to the first school that offered him a scholarship, Santa Clara, but later decommitted after his high school coach thought he should keep his options open. He then committed to Pepperdine after a good experience while attending his sister's Midnight Madness event. George later decommitted midway through his senior year until he eventually flip-flopped his way into choosing Fresno State University, despite offers from Georgetown and Penn State because of greater playing time opportunities. George ended up playing 2 years at Fresno State. He ranked 8th most entertaining player in college basketball by Sports Illustrated. George was named All-WAC second team and rated 2nd in the WAC in free throw percentage, steals, and steals per game. His sudden meteoric rise would have him announcing that he would forego his final 2 seasons of college eligibility and enter the 2010 NBA draft. He made his first appearance on a 2010 mock draft on Draft Express a month into his sophomore season, and by May of 2010, mock drafts such as Draft Express, ESPN.com, and The Hoops Report predicted that George would be selected 12th overall by the Memphis Grizzlies. And 2 days before the draft, Mark J. Spears from Yahoo Sports wrote an article about an anonymous Eastern Conference scout stating that in 5 years, Paul George will be the best player to come out of this draft. George was invited to sit in the green room during the draft and ended up being selected 10th overall by the Indiana Pacers. During his first 2 NBA seasons, George played mostly the shooting guard position. However, with Danny Granger missing nearly the entire 2012-13 season due to knee and calf injuries, George began playing the small forward position and became the go-to offensive option for the Pacers in his 3rd season. This is when casual NBA fans started to notice just how good Paul George and his Pacers were. He'd go on to lead his team to the Eastern Conference Finals for the 2nd straight year, only to be eliminated by arguably the greatest player of all time, LeBron James. But in the 2013 playoffs, he did give us this, an all-time NBA playoff dunk. I was watching this live when it happened, and my mouth hasn't closed since.
Comes George, got the step and stuffs, what a move, and counts on the foul!
To be fair to George, no one could get past LeBron in the East. And I mean no one. Just ask Raptors fans. And at the peak of his powers, and coming off of 2 Eastern Conference Finals appearances, George was poised to break out even more. But then, during the 2014 offseason, George was named to the training camp roster for the U.S. national team. George had been considered a virtual lock to make the roster. However, during an open team scrimmage on August 1st, that's when it all happened. He landed awkwardly at the base of the basket stanchion after fouling James Harden on a fast break. George suffered a compound fracture to not one but both bones in his lower right leg, was carted off the court, and head coach addressed the arena stating that the game would not continue out of respect to George and his family. Soon after, George quickly went into surgery for the fracture, with a pin being inserted in the leg. Paul George's father then had this to say: he's just resting right now. If it had to break, it broke the right way. It broke evenly, so they're saying he should be back 100%. But of course, he's got to go through his process of healing and getting back in the gym. But they're saying that shouldn't stop him from doing what he was doing once he's healthy again. While no official prognosis was initially given, he was considered likely to miss the entire 2014-15 season. The NBA world was devastated, but George, who had said he wanted to play at some time during the season, put in the work and was cleared to put weight on the leg in late September and was shooting jumpers in practice in late October. He participated in his first full practice of the season on February 26, 3 days earlier than expected, and was ruled a possibility to play within a week on March 20th. And on April 5th, George made his return to the Pacers lineup for the first time since sustaining his leg injury with Team USA. He ended up scoring 13 points in 15 minutes and made 2 key three-pointers early in the fourth quarter, helping the Pacers defeat the Miami Heat 112-89. He played out the final 6 games of the season for Indiana, but before the 2015-16 season started, no one knew exactly what to expect from George. Some thought he was going to be a role player for the rest of his career. However, that wasn't the case at all, because in the 2015-16 season, George showed the entire world he was back, and maybe even better than before. The California native averaged 23 points per game for the Pacers while making the All-Star team. The basketball community was thrilled to see George playing the game he loved again at an elite level, and the pundits who thought George was going to be a role player were nowhere to be found during that campaign. And then, during the 2016-2017 season, George put up 23.7 points per contest and once again made the All-Star team. He was now firmly back in the elite company of basketball players, and quite frankly, it was incredible to watch given the seriousness of his leg injury. Unfortunately for the Pacers, the 2016-2017 season was the last year that George would play for the team. Following the conclusion of the 2017 playoffs, George told Pacers management he wasn't going to re-sign with the franchise. So, in a stunning move, the Pacers traded George to the Oklahoma City Thunder in July of 2017. Reports at the time said George wanted to be dealt to either the Los Angeles Lakers or the Los Angeles Clippers, but there was no way the Pacers were going to acquiesce to the All-Star. In his first season with OKC, George would average 22 points per game alongside Russell Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony. OKC, though, lost in the first round of the 2018 playoffs. After the Thunder got bounced by the Utah Jazz, George shocked the world and re-signed with the Thunder on a massive 4-year, $136.9 million maximum contract. Every time I see numbers like this, I simply ask to myself, can't lend me $20? This was a great story to cover since not many experts thought George was ever going to see max money again. And the first year after signing his new contract, Paul George would return to MVP form and ended up being third in MVP voting. He would go on to average 28 points per game and probably would have finished with more MVP votes if his shoulders didn't fail him near the end of the season. The Thunder ended up losing to Dame Lillard and the Portland Trailblazers in the first round of the 2019 playoffs. And Game 5 of that series turned out to be the last game Paul George and Westbrook would play for OKC. And in the summer of 2019, the Thunder traded George to the Clippers, but only because the silent assassin Kawhi Leonard heavily advocated and convinced Paul to come. It felt like that summer in 2019, Kawhi Leonard had the world in his hands. The Thunder would end up receiving Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, 5 first-round draft picks, and the rights to swap 2 other first-round picks. So you're telling me this man had a broken leg, got a max contract, and ended up getting traded for serviceable players, a future star it looks like in Gilgeous-Alexander, and up to 7 potential picks? If that doesn't scream value, I don't know what is. But not everything was roses after his comeback, because you see, during the 2020 NBA playoffs, George drew frequent criticism from NBA fans and media for his inconsistent performance, because in 13 playoff games, George averaged 20 points per game, his lowest scoring average in the playoffs since his 3rd season in the NBA, while shooting 39% from the field. And him and the Clippers also squandered a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets, becoming only the 12th NBA team in NBA history to do so. And then, it just went from bad to worse, because in Game 7 against the Nuggets, George would only score 10 points on 25% shooting, and didn't score a single bucket in the 4th quarter. On some current-day James Harden-ish, George's dismal performance in Game 7 included this memorable three-point shot attempt. After that performance in that series, Twitter and the internet gave this man the nickname Pandemic P, which is an ironic reference to the Playoff P nickname that George infamously christened himself with a few years prior. But Paul George, just over a week after the 2021 season began, George scored a season-high 42 points and grabbed 8 rebounds. Yeah, it was in a defeat to the Portland Trailblazers, but this just shows how talented this man really is. Unfortunately for George, though, he ended up spraining his elbow on December 6th, and on Christmas Day, the Clippers announced that George had suffered a torn ulnar collateral ligament in his right elbow. He was ruled out for at least 3 to 4 weeks. Now, typically, when NBA players miss time, understandably, it takes time to get the rust off. But no, on March 29th, 2022, his first game back from injury, George would score 34 points, delivering 6 assists along with 4 steals in a 121-115 comeback victory over the Utah Jazz. I don't care what nobody says, this man is still top 15 in the league. The Clippers, after a very encouraging season, didn't end up making the playoffs, losing in the play-in game to the Minnesota Timberwolves and then the New Orleans Pelicans. But when George's current contract with the Clippers expires, he will have made $217,812,725 in NBA money. Not bad for a guy who some thought was never going to be an NBA star ever again. And that's how Paul George turned trials into triumph. Don't forget to leave a like on the video and hit subscribe for more dope NBA content.